Okay, guys, today I am joined by a guy that really doesn't need an introduction. UFC Hall of Famer turned now PFL commentator, actor. You've seen him in Expendables. Randy Couture, the natural. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. So we're here today to talk some PFL. Now, Randy, you're a color commentator for the organization. They just had a massive season. The 2021 season ended in October. Handed out a ton of $1 million checks. And Randy, you had the best seat in the house, right? You were there working alongside Kenny Florian and Sean O'Connell. So can you just give me your thoughts on your general thoughts on the season as a whole?
It was amazing. A lot of anticipation going into this third season with the new signing, of Rory McDonald, Verdum.
Yep.
And then two returning champs and Nathan Schultz and Almer. Yeah, a lot of anticipation going into this season for some big hitters, some big names. Seeing Kayla try to do back-to-back and just watch how much she's progressed and continued to improve as a female mixed martial artist. The addition of Clarissa Shields and kind of her sampling of MMA to see if it was going to be a good fit for her was exciting as well. The stories, I think that was the coolest thing this whole season, was just so many really cool stories. And if you'd have told me at the end of it, none of those guys we just mentioned were in the finals, I would have laughed at you. But that's how it unfolded. And that's one of the things I love about this organization. Nobody is protected. You have to go out in that cage and win matches, score points, and make it to the playoffs, make it to the finals. So it just doesn't matter. Publicity stunts, run your head, talk all the trash you want if that's who you are. But it's not going to get you anywhere. You still have to go up there and score and win. And that meritocracy is the absolute thing I love about this organization.
And I asked Peter Murray last week about this, and I'd be curious for your take, Randy. Do you think that you had a bunch of these UFC, Anthony Pettis, who's a former UFC lightweight champion. Yeah, Rory McDonald, a massive name in the organization. They come over and, like you mentioned, they didn't make it to the finals. Pettis had a rough time. McDonald, he suffered a few losses too. Do you think that this brings some sort of legitimacy? Obviously PFL is a legitimate organization, but the casual fan, they watch it and they'll say, "Oh, Rory McDonald's in this tournament, he's going to win." Do you think that this brought a certain level of legitimacy to PFL, something maybe it needed?
I think absolutely. Getting names like that, guys that are still on the marquee. Didn't matter what promotion you put them in, they're going to bring eyes, they're going to bring attention, and people expect them to compete and compete well. And I think a lot of people expected them to win. I would have lost money on some of those fights too. There was some great ones there, and that absolutely brings the legitimacy. And then you see a guy like Bruno Capelozza, come out of moving up to heavyweight from 205. Said from day one, look, these guys are not going to be able to deal with my speed and my explosiveness. And man, did he live up to that. And I had flashbacks of Vitor Belfort in the early days, having to face him a couple times. And just if you stand around in front of that guy, he is going to bust you right in the mouth and blow right through you. So having guys like that and making those types of analogies to people they remind you of. Everybody wants to compare Kayla Harrison to Ronda Rousey because of their judo backgrounds. I think Kayla Harrison is head and shoulders above anything that Ronda Rousey ever did in MMA. And that's saying a lot. Ronda Rousey was a hell of a performer and their little darling for 5 years, probably their biggest moneymaker. And I think Kayla is just head and shoulders above where she was at when she, kind of made the transition over to the WWE and the other stuff that she's doing. And that's a tribute to Kayla. And the team, Dan Brown and the guys there, top team, done a great job with her. She's kind of let go of some of that perfectionism she was carrying around. She was being very, very hard on herself. And just to watch her, the diligence, the work ethic, checking her ego at the door, willing to put herself out there in uncomfortable situations and just grow as an athlete and a fighter. And now, obviously, this season, one of the great stories, stepping up and becoming a mother, taking on those two kids. And now the title of mom added to the list is a pretty remarkable thing. So big fan of Kayla and how far she's come in a short amount of time. I got to see her in those very first fights and see the kind of trepidation and this whole new environment she was walking into, and watch her embrace it with grace and really an amazing style.
the big story, one of the big stories coming out of the season was that, okay, Kayla Harrison's now a free agent. I spoke with Peter Murray last week, and he told me, well, in fact, technically she's not a free agent right now. So who knows what's going on with Kayla? But for you, Randy, as someone, working with PFL, I'm sure you'd love to see her come back. Is there, if you guys do get Kayla back, I mean, what do you do with her? Do you try to get the Cyborg fight? That's what Peter was talking about. He'd love to work with Bellator to get that done. What do you think they should do with Kayla?
Well, we definitely have to get some more athletes in that division, and certainly some athletes that have the ability to challenge Kayla. I mean, she really blasted everybody this season, and then I don't think she lost a single round the entire season. And I think almost all of them she finished in the first round, which is pretty remarkable. We definitely have to find some athletes out there that are able to challenge her. I think at the end of the day, the organization spent a lot of time, effort, and money getting her out there and getting her to this stage. I think that she recognizes that and is obviously all about her allegiance to the PFL for getting her this far. At the end of the day, I understand where she's coming from too. She wants the challenge. She wants to be considered the best female fighter of all time, not just right now, but of all time. So that may require her, if we can't acquire some deeper talent in the pool, that may require her to go somewhere else to find those challenges and to achieve those things that she set out to achieve. Back-to-back championships in the fashion that she did it in, pretty remarkable. And I would put her up against anybody in the sport right now in the women's division at 155. And the fact that she can make 145 and not kill herself, still perform like she did in Invicta in the off year with 2020 and everything going on. She had a couple fights there. I just think that she is the one to beat. Everybody talks about Nunes, and I know they train together. And I think pound for pound, Nunes is probably the best female fighter on the planet right now. Very few females have the full package, able to crack like she cracks and grapple and do everything. And I think, that's a challenge, the type of challenge that I think Kayla Harrison is looking for. Whether or not we as an organization can get there, I hope we can, because I'd love to keep her. I'd love to keep being part of her journey and keep calling fights that she's in.
How would you look at this fight now with Kayla and Amanda Nunes? How would you break that one down?
Well, I think Kayla is smart enough not to go in there and try to go toe to toe with somebody that punches the way Nunes does. I think that was Rousey's undoing in both the Holly Holm fight and the Nunes fight. Her coach had filled her with some false sense of security about her ability to strike. The fight before Holly Holm, she had a first round knockout, first knockout of her career. He blew a bunch of smoke up her hind end and told her what a great striker she was, instead of going out there and dancing with the one that put her in that position, which is her grappling. And I don't think Kayla would ever make that mistake. I think she knows where she's strongest. She knows if she gets her hands on anybody, they are going to have a real problem stopping her from getting position, getting dominance, and finding a way to end the fight. And if I'm Kayla Harrison and that matchup happens, and I know Dan Brown, he's a very, very smart fighter, very cerebral coach. He's done an amazing job. They'll have her dialed in and ready to get where she needs to get to win.
Now, I would say that if PFL does keep Kayla Harrison, I think more logical and realistic fight, if you could make a super fight, would be Cyborg. PFL and Bellator working together to make that like mega event, I guess. How would you look at a fight, I guess, with Cyborg? Is it kind of more the same, right? Usually in her judo, instead of getting into a firefight with Cyborg?
Yes, I think a same approach with someone with the power and the aggression that Cyborg brings to her fights. Obviously, I was in Gina Carano's corner for that title fight in Strikeforce back in the day, and spent some time with Gina preparing her to go and face Cyborg, and that didn't go our way that night. 13 seconds away from getting out of the first round. I think if we'd have got out of the first round, it might have been a different outcome. We might have been able to wear on her and try to get her tired, because she's so aggressive. She reminds me of a female Vanderlei Silva, the way she fights. I mean, she's the female axe murderer in so many ways. She just comes out slinging. You better be ready to go and go at a torrential pace if you're facing somebody like that. I like that matchup. I think where Nunes is very refined, great counter striker, great power. Cyborg is very raw, wide open, and that wide openness and over aggressiveness sometimes leaves her vulnerable. And so, but I think at the end of the day, you still got to get your hands on her, take some steam out of her, make her grapple, make her fight out of that clinch, make her fight off her back. And I think you put yourself in a good position to win. If you could not get caught getting there.
Is there another storyline that you would look at with the PFL 2021 season and think like, this was my favorite storyline besides the Kayla Harrison stuff? Obviously that was probably the biggest one coming out of the season. I
think that the Magomed Kirimov, Ray Cooper trilogy, if you will, was a really cool story. The dichotomy of those two personas, the way they fight, their abilities. I just think there was a lot of hype and a lot of people anticipating that matchup. You know, having had them meet in the first season, Cooper dropping the final match to be the world champion to Magomed, wanting that, literally waiting for 3 years to be able to get back in there. Magomed not being in there in season 2 because of an injury, and then Ray winning it just led to this storybook. These guys are finally going to make it to the finals. Cooper's getting his rematch. Magomed's going to prove that, you know, he deserved to be there. It was a fluke, which I don't think many people bought anyway. I mean, he's as technical as any fighter in that weight division, for sure, in my opinion. I'd put him up against anybody. Ray, man, seeing him through the course of the second season kind of tone it down a little bit, not be so frivolous with his energy and so over aggressive, and watch him kind of refine his tactics, use his wrestling more effectively and more diligently, and then still possess that power in both hands. I mean, that guy is dangerous. And I think that was the other storyline that everybody was so psyched about, and boy, did it deliver. It was a fun fight.
Now there's massive plans for 2022. As you know, Peter Murray said, and I quote, that he wants to triple down on events. You guys have the Challenger Series coming as well. There's a lot going on. Now for you, Randy, are you planning on commentating most of these events, or are you looking just to do the bigger cards? What's your plans with 2022?
No, we haven't really sat down and talked about a plan about that. Obviously, if I'm available, I'm happy to be involved with this organization, to continue to be part of that broadcast team. I feel like I'm sitting there watching the fights in the best seat in the house with 2 of my college buddies, and we're poking each other and having fun and just having a great time, kind of highlighting what's going on in that cage. So I definitely want to be available as much as I can. I'm juggling, you know, the movie schedule, and this has been one of the busiest years I've ever had in 20 years of being an actor. So I've done 5 movies this year, which I've never done that many in 1 year. It's been crazy. But you know, at the end of the day, I really enjoy commentating. I feel like and all 3 of us are fighters, so we know exactly what we're looking at, and that gives us the opportunity to highlight some of those nuances and those more subtle things that the average fan doesn't pick up on or doesn't recognize. So I think that we have fun doing that. I think we do it pretty well together, and it's just a lot of fun.
Just looking at it objectively, Randy, I mean, how would you stack up your commentating team? Like you mentioned, you have, you know, 3 fighters there, and you got, you've won several world titles. You got Kenny Florian, who challenged for several world titles. You got Sean O'Connell, who won the PFL championship. You got guys in there that have truly been in there. How would you stack your team with other teams, say with Bellator or the UFC, the main UFC one, the John Anik, DC, and Joe Rogan team?
You know, it's really about flavor. You know, each one of those teams has their own flavor. And just like going to Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, you're gonna kind of gravitate towards the particular flavor you like. I think all those guys are all great guys. I know all of those guys through the course of my career in fighting. I think it's unique that we're all 3 fighters in the PFL. You know, obviously, let's be honest, Sean's doing most of the heavy lifting. The ins and outs and how good Sean has gotten at that job has been really fun to watch. I watched him; he's literally running out of the booth to take off his suit and get his board shorts on to walk in the cage. I'm like, well, how are you doing that, dude? That's insane. And you know, working with other guys to hold it down while he was in the cage fighting, but he got a lot of experience commentating football, doing radio. He is very, very good, and he does such a great job at teeing me and Kenny up knowing our strengths and weaknesses, which questions to ask us, which ones to send to Kenny and kind of lead us in the right direction. And it's just been a pleasure working certainly with Sean, but with both of those guys. Obviously, Kenny is new to the team this season. And always, you never know when you change the formula and you kind of change the chemistry a little bit, if it's going to work out, if it's going to be flat. But from day one, it just seemed to fit. It felt comfortable. And that's a tribute to Kenny. He's a smart guy. He's articulate. He knows this sport as well as anybody I've ever met. And that translates to being a good color commentator and a good play-by-play guy.
I do find it like really interesting, watching the sport for so long. And, obviously I'm one of the guys that I came into the sport watching the Ultimate Fighter season 1. And obviously you were the coach on there. Kenny Florian was one of the participants in the middleweight division. Did you guys maintain a relationship throughout after that show, or did you kind of rekindle your relationship when he came on with the PFL? Can you guys just, what's it like with you and Kenny? What's the chemistry? What's your relationship?
We always got along. We got along great during the show. It was a challenging experience being there for 90 days, living in that house. Honestly, I don't know how they survived that whole endeavor, but it was certainly fun. I was happy to go back to my hotel room and not have to be in that house after all the long days of training. But we've always gotten along, maintained our friendship, and it's like so many of the other fighters that we competed against and see. Unless they're in your gym training on a daily basis. You see them at events, you see them at signings, you see them at this thing and that thing. And always saw Kenny just about everywhere. Watched him commentate for some of the other organizations when they announced that he was being added to the team and they were making some changes. I thought it was going to be a great fit, and I was excited to work with him. Seeing him on, on the Battle Bots show and doing a great job with Chris Rose on there, and kind of applying that same fighter's knowledge to those matchups for the Battle Bots. I mean, he's very articulate, very smart guy. And that's great. It's a great guy you want to work with.
Now, if you had to pick one fight that you want to see in 2022 for the PFL, what is that fight, Randy?
Oh boy.
Or you can give me two.
Yeah, it'd be definitely hard to narrow it down. There's so many amazing athletes. The sport just continues to refine the tactics and the technique, and things seem to go in cycles. And man, we're on a strong one. I haven't seen a roster for this next season yet. I know we're going to bring back some familiar names for sure. We always add some new names. I think we had 25 countries represented this season, which is remarkable. Be excited to see Emiliano Sordi in 2019 had a nearly flawless, perfect season, and had COVID, got sick with a staff. I mean, had a lot of hurdles getting through this season, managed to, be right there at the end, knocking on the door. I've loved the way he competed in 2019. I love the heart that he showed in the 2021 season. And I hope to see him back up there, back on that horse, and see him compete, because he's fun every time he goes out there.
Now, so when I spoke with Peter last week, he mentioned that, because you guys are tripling down on events, you need obviously way more fighters. So they're looking to expand the roster quite a bit. And he also told me, and I quote, he's talked to a bunch of iconic fighters. Now, Randy, being, a guy that's been in the sport for so long, and you probably almost everybody in it. Now, is there an iconic fighter out there that maybe you're thinking that is a free agent, or somebody that you'd love to see come over to the PFL?
I mean, there's a whole list of guys. There's a whole list of guys that would be amazing additions. No one particular name comes to mind. Honestly, I think there's room for a whole bunch of people in the organization. And I think what's cool is that, and I read the synopsis for this season when we were in the transition, the rebranding year, and Don Davis handed over the notebook, and I started reading through it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is going to be a wild. And there was part of me is like, if I was 25, I would be all over this thing. When your next fight is. It's, again, the meritocracy of the whole thing. Not having to guess how long am I going to have to wait before I get another matchup. It's all laid out for you right there. So how to, now you got to go about managing that adversity of that schedule so that you can get the most out of yourself and get yourself into that final match, the big one. And I think that there's a lot of guys that had the same scratching their head, questioning that in that first season. And now look at them, they're coming around and they're interested in not only getting a shot at that kind of money, because that's life-changing money for most all of these guys. Have never been close to making that kind of money in their fight career. But that regularity, that work ethic comes into play. And they want to know, man, I'm going to fight again in 8 weeks and be ready to go. And I think that is what's attracting a lot of these guys. Don Davis and Pete Murray are very, very clever. They built something very special here in fitting mixed martial arts into a true sports format. And I think there's a lot of guys that want to be part of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously with your wrestling background, Randy, and I'm assuming competing quite a bit, probably a couple matches a day, a couple matches on a weekend. Now with the PFL, I mean, someone like Ray Cooper III that won the welterweight tournament, he had to fight 4 times in like 6 months. That's obviously a ton of work. Some fighters, on an average year, a fighter will fight like 3 times a year. Now, it sounds like you're all for that schedule. Hey, I mean, that's obviously intense, but
I like it. I questioned it in the beginning, just like I think a lot of people did, turning around that quickly and how is that going to go and what kind of adversity is that going to be for these guys? I was the busiest in the last 18 months of my career. I think I had 5 fights in that 18-month stretch, which is the most I ever did in that short amount of time. I shortened my camps. I had to manage training camps differently and all of that. And I think, Anthony Pettis came up to us at the booth after the finals. And he said, man, I see what I did wrong here. I didn't recognize this back-to-back battle of attrition type of thing, and I didn't manage that properly. I'm going to be back next year, and I've got this figured out. I'm going to do this better. A guy like that tells you that he figured out where he went wrong and why he wasn't fighting that night on the finals. You got to believe that. I think he analyzed how he managed it, maybe overlooked what it was going to be like to turn around and fight every 6 or 7 weeks. And I'm anxious to see him come back next season, manage that time and that energy a little bit differently. And I think we'll see a little bit different Anthony Pettis.
Now, Randy, I got a few career questions for you. Do you have a favorite rivalry, Randy? Now, you were obviously in your fight career, you had a ton of rivalries, and not say bitter rivalries, but say with Liddell or Ortiz or Belfort.
Well, I think the Liddell trilogy was definitely one of the first big trilogies, and we had mutual respect for each other. We knew each other before we started fighting through wrestling. He wrestled at Cal Poly when I was coaching at Oregon State. We had met each other and been around each other, and I think had that mutual respect for each other. But we're both competitive sons of bitches too, so neither one of us wants to lose. Certainly I was the underdog in a lot of fights in my career, and certainly an underdog going into that first fight with him, and managed to find a way to solve the problem that is Chuck Liddell. And he made the appropriate adjustments for the second and third fight, moved his feet a lot more, did a lot of things that he hadn't done and weren't in his fighting style previously to that, and made it a lot more difficult for me to get a beat on him and find myself, in the best position to win for the second and third fight. And he came into his own. He came into his own stride. Dominated the weight class, I think, for 3 or 4 years after that. I mean, literally checked off every loss he'd ever had, almost going down the list to Jeremy Horn and right on down the line to recoup some of those fights that he dropped earlier in his career. It was probably the biggest, and then, coming off that first season of The Ultimate Fighter as well, with both of us being coaches, being on TV, for 13 weeks of that season, to go into that second fight. Obviously the first fight's my favorite, but that's probably, the biggest trilogy, and what people remember most. And me and Chuck joke about it because he gets Randy all the time and I get Chuck all the time. Hey, Chuck, I'm a huge, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure you're that big a fan, dude. But that one for sure. Obviously the Belfort fight, I think that was a fight that set the tone for my entire career. It was my second big UFC. the super fight that was going to get me into the title fight. He was blasting through everybody at that time. And I was 34 years old. Most people thought I was already over the hill and was crazy for, certainly my mom thought I was crazy for getting into this sport. And so to win that one and go out and kind of as a huge underdog, kind of defy everybody, what everybody thought was going to happen, definitely set the tone for the rest of my career. And I found myself in that exact same situation in the Liddell fight, in the Ortiz fight, in the Tim Sylvia fight. I mean, you could go right down the list. The Pedro Hizzo fight, the first time I fought him when Zuffa first bought the company, just signed him to the biggest deal anybody had ever had, a 9-fight deal for this young Brazilian kid that they were sure was going to beat this old man that they were stuck with as a heavyweight champ. It obviously didn't go that way. So
now I'm curious about this one, Randy. Now, the Ultimate Fighter one is, credited for being one of the most important things to happen to the industry, getting it further on the map. You were obviously a massive focal point of the show. So it's always talked about how big that show was for the sport. But what about for your individual career, Randy? I mean, I feel like that obviously did make you a much bigger star in your own right.
Yeah, I think that you are correct. That show changed the landscape. And honestly, you could break it down a little further and say that Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner fight in specific changed the landscape of our sport. Anytime you're going from a 1.5 rating to a 6 in the course of 15 minutes, something pretty remarkable is going on. Everybody and their brother is calling their neighbor saying, dude, you have to see this. And I think that definitely changed the landscape for a lot of us. And certainly I was in a position where I thought I was going to probably headed towards retirement. Honestly, I lost the second and the third Chuck fight, and I did retire. I was going through a divorce and just wasn't, things just weren't firing on all cylinders. I didn't feel a lot like myself, to be honest. And I thought it was time to kind of step away. I was pushing 42, I think 42 or 43 at the time. So, and then the show was such a huge success that in some ways, I think I probably could have walked away at that time and maybe been okay with it, but the chance to fight at 205 and it all kind of re-energized my entire career. Beating Chuck that first time, getting to unify the title with Tito, that was a very pivotal moment. I was seriously considering retiring then and settling down and just running a gym and had a new baby. There were a lot of factors. And then the show was so successful. Obviously, losing the second and third Chuck fight was great for Chuck. I'm not sure how much it helped me. A lot of people didn't see the first fight, didn't realize that the second and third one were had already, the trilogy had already started. So it was definitely instrumental in keeping me going for another 4 or 5 years. Absolutely.
What's your favorite moment in the cage? Now, quickly, I'll tell you mine. I'll never forget. It's one of my favorite fight moments ever. It's when you returned to take on Tim Sylvia. And I remember within the first 10 seconds, you dropped him. So for you, Randy, what is your favorite moment? I mean, it might be hard to pick one exact one, but
yeah, well, it's that fight for sure. We had to go to the other end of that fight, and that last 10-second countdown with the 23,000 people in that arena, which at that time was the biggest crowd that the sport had ever had in North America. And that last 10-second countdown just ringing in my ears as the clock was going down. I think that first knockdown was probably the closest I ever came to that one punch knockout that, guys like Chuck and other guys had. Even Tim Sylvia himself had those type of fights. I've never had that. I was more of a battle of attrition type of fighter. And that was the closest I ever came. And I don't think that those fans from that first 25 seconds and that punch sat back down for the rest of the 5 rounds. I mean, it was a remarkable crowd and a remarkable night for sure.
And last question for you, Randy. You mentioned you've worked on 5 films this year. Can you give us a little bit of a teaser on what's going on with your acting career?
Oh man, it's been a stellar year. I think some of that are repercussions or ramifications from everybody kind of being locked down from 2020, not a lot of new content being made. And then the floodgates seemed to open in February of this year. I stepped up as an executive producer for the first time in my career working in film. You know, my first film was back in early 2000, Cradle to the Grave, Jet Li and DMX. You know, and obviously we lost DMX this last year. It was a real shame. He was a talented guy. But that was my first feature film. You know, one role, one line in that movie. Chuck and Tito were actually in that movie as well. And here we are over 20 years later, still working in film, still having a blast. It's been a crazy year this year. Obviously, we just finished Expendables 4. They've been batting around script ideas for 3 or 4 years now. The third one financially didn't do quite as well than the first two, largely because the movie got hacked 3 weeks before it went to the theater. It showed up on the black market, which certainly hurt the bottom line a little bit. And a lot of times at the end of the day in business, it's about how the film does financially before whether you get to make another one. You know, we're certainly hoping that Expendables 4 with the new additions of, 50 Cent, Megan Fox, Andy Garcia, Jacob Scipio, Levi Tran, some new cast members in there, obviously a little shift in everything going on there, that this one's going to be very successful and we're going to get to do Expendables 5. Nobody does that better than Stallone, for sure. He's just such a smart guy, and it's so much fun to be on set, watch him work. He comes up with these one-liners and just, he's really an amazing person. Dark Angels is the one that I executive produced. That was the first one I did in February. Mindy Robinson, my significant other, wrote the script about 5 years ago, and I fell in love with it, and then managed to meet the right people and get all the right things put together to be able to make that film. I'm very excited. We just sold that, so that's great news. Mindy's got an outline for a second one, so we may get to do another one of those. The Demon Pit. It's kind of a supernatural thriller. Dean Cain, Richard Grieco, Mike Madsen. I mean, just an amazing cast. Gianni Capaldi, just a bunch of great people to work with. We had a blast making that film. It's been a crazy year. Got to decide if I want to go to Miami here this next week and do a sixth film this year. So I'm kind of licking my wounds with the jet lag right now. And if you ask me right at this second, I would say now I'm gonna go to the ranch and unplug and relax for the rest of the year. But we'll see.